My honorable name is Ricky McGee, and as a member of the Stuck on Replay team, I am now a sound in your ear because I've been given an opportunity to introduce our national petition to amend the United States Constitution's 13th Amendment, more specifically to do away with this exception clause. As a country, America's apparent fixation with the systemic disenfranchisement, hypercriminalization, and imprisonment of its black citizenship has not been lost to the seasoned eye. While chattel slavery marked the deplorable end of this country's history, it is the actions or oftentimes inactions of this country's leadership post-emancipation that is equally disgraceful. Today I will specifically speak to the very article that was to have elevated the social status of my forebearers from chattel to men, a clause which has actually facilitated their re-chattelization through imprisonment. The 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution, seen as the grandest emancipation gesture in U.S. history, has at its root a provision that has reinstituted our standing as property through criminal sanction. Black people have known from the day that the system of antebellum plantation slavery was deemed illegal by the 13th Amendment, that the justice system was then appointed as designated heir. It was obvious to them and the article's co-authors that to criminalize free men was simply a new way to control a marginalized population within the slaveocracy of the South, thus exercise slavery under other names and other forms. The 13th Amendment's accepting clause has its origins in Article 6 of Thomas Jefferson's Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which itself had sought to place free and fugitive blacks into private slavery rather than the public penal servitude as a punishment for crimes fashioned from racially discriminatory laws. Slavery in America was racially based, and the regulation of slaves was, in the end, the regulation of race. In fact, slavery itself was this country's first institution of mass incarceration. The legal system was used to support post-Civil War recovery in the South, as illustrated in the political dynamics which shaped the penal sanctions imposed upon black people. New legal and social patterns of discrimination emerged at the time when the wording of the 13th Amendment was being debated on the Senate floor, which were discussions held by a powerful slaveholding class who themselves were hostile towards industrialization. It was free men that legislation could be tailored to create severe disability towards, in an effort to replicate the truest causation of slavery, profits, based on a system rooted upon the exploitation of black people. After the passing of the 13th Amendment, it soon became a law which burdens blacks disproportionately, which indeed validated it. Its influences could be traced to racial consideration. Through the crafting of black codes, Confederate states imposed crippling statutes on free men, which, when sanctioned, could establish a system of peonages or apprenticeships which resembled pre-emancipation slavery. Legislators sought to maintain control over free blacks by passing criminal laws and ordinances directed at blacks by now tailoring petty crimes to serious offenses. For example, a Georgia law passed in 1875 which made the stealing of a hog a felony, while in Missouri, pig laws define theft of property worth more than $10 as grand larceny, which now involves the penalty for up to 5 years of hard labor, if convicted, of course. As a result of these colorblind laws, Southern prisons swelled for the first time became predominantly black. The prison population tripled in just 2 years. Today, nothing separates the social experience of black and white Americans in this country like their involvement in the criminal justice system, where 1 to every 9 black men between the ages of 20 to 34 are incarcerated, compared to 1 to every 106 white males in the same age demographic. These numbers have a genocidal hue to them. Do we wonder how they have become so pronounced under the legislative eye of our government? Stated by Justice Marshall in 1978, racism in our society has been so pervasive that no one, regardless of wealth and position, has managed to escape its impact. The experience of the Negro in America is not merely the history of slavery alone, but that a whole people were marked as inferior by the laws, and that mark has endured. The dream of America as a great melting pot has not been realized for the Negro. Because of the color of his skin, he has never even made it into the pot. Quasi-colorblind judicial, legislative, and penal laws all played a meaningful role in ensuring that transitional equality was at the heart of every provision. 13th Amendment's exception clause. History has revealed that the framers of the Constitution, even Mr. Lincoln himself, was motivated by invidious racial prejudices and considerations based on the criminogenic stigma of black people. Despite the fact that a law may be drafted as racially neutral on its face, there are always factors derived from even unconscious racism that infiltrates the legislative result. Courts now have openly recognized that laws of yesterday were camouflaged with a discriminatorial purpose. Even the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was explicitly designed to eradicate the deep institution of slavery, had in fact reinforced the wholesale ridding of the death of black people branded as either felon or misdemeanor, thus legislating the system known as convict leasing. Ostensibly neutral laws were intentionally being used to oppress blacks. Vagrant laws were passed diabolically with the intention of reintroducing them back to the central tenets of slavery. These laws provided for the selling of these people back into slavery as a penalty for crimes committed. The Civil Rights Acts of 1866, 1870, 1871, and 1875 had all respectively fell short in eliminating the racial order, which had simply reinventing ways to target blacks through the execution of punitive policies and practices. Although the overt imprints of colonial slavery had all but died, institutions around this country have created, during the 4 decades after the Civil War, a public and political association between blackness and criminality, so methodically that we were considered to be inherently criminalistic. Movies like The Birth of the Nation in 1914 served as propaganda tools used to cement the stereotype of black criminality into the national consciousness. Due to the language detailed in the 13th Amendment's exception clause, a society had now existed which had openly tolerated the rechattelization of black Americans through the evolution of antebellum slave plantations, chain gangs, convict leasing camps, penage camps, prison plantations, to a privatized prison industry. The detainment of blacks was now justified by a national belief system that identifies crime in terms of race and race in terms of crime. Now considered as this nation's deviant class, race has factored into criminal profiles, reasonable suspicion searches to stop arrest provisions. Every day of our lives, we still endure daily indignities from the legacy of slavery, from 101 crack to powder cocaine ratios, where 96.9% of those convicted at the height of its passion were black. Race has still served as a significant factor during sentence enhancements. Sounds familiar? There's much debate as to whether the mass incarceration of black people is akin to slavery. Well, placed in a different context, just imagine if antebellum plantation slavery was a child. Would you be able to recognize him as an adult? How about if I told you that he was now a multi-billion-dollar industry contingent upon the dehumanization, magnified criminalization of black people who serve as his greatest commodity? The 13th Amendment's exception clause is a disgraceful badge of slavery, which has either directly or indirectly contributed to continued systemic subjugation of black people in this country. Our mission today is to represent the voice of those who, because of their neglected political status, never had the opportunity to debate the very amendment that impacted them the most. This is not merely a symbolic endeavor, but a very real opportunity to rise above simply being in this country, but now being of it. The 13th Amendment's exception clause is not just insensitive, but was eerily prophetic when one examines the progressive dehumanizing practices legislated to target black Americans in this country since its inception. To amend the 13th Amendment's exception clause is more than just our right, it is our obligation.